I hope everybody is having an absolutely wonderful day. This right here is going to be on chapter 16, and this is going to be the second part. And specifically, we are going to be covering the hypothalamus, the posterior pituitary, and the anterior pituitary. So let us get started. And if you hear a dog barking in the background, it's because my air conditioning is getting fixed and they don't really like people in the house. So sorry about that. But I want to get these videos out to you guys as soon as possible. So, all right. So the hypothalamus. Hopefully you remember where the hypothalamus is. So the hypothalamus is in the brain, right? It's connected to the pituitary gland, the hypophysis, via a stalk called the infundibulum. The pituitary itself secretes at least 8 major hormones. We're going to talk about 8 major hormones anyway. And the pituitary has 2 major lobes. It has a posterior pituitary, which is composed of neural tissue. That's really important. It's neural tissue, and it's going to secrete neural hormones. The posterior lobe, along with the infundibulum, make up the neural hypophysis. The anterior pituitary, the other side, the adenohypophysis, consists of glandular tissue. So the posterior lobe is a neural tissue derived from a downgrowth of the brain. It maintains a neural connection to the hypothalamus via the hypothalamic hypophyseal tract, and it runs through the infundibulum. It secretes, now this is really important, it secretes, does not create, it just secretes 2 hormones, 2 neural hormones, oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone. And antidiuretic hormone is often abbreviated ADH. These hormones are stored in axon terminals in the posterior pituitary and are released into the blood when the neurons fire. So if we're looking at this, remember I said that the posterior pituitary is only secreting these hormones. It's not actually creating the hormones. So we have up here hypothalamic neurons, and this is a diagram showing the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. And we have hypothalamic neurons synthesizing either oxytocin or antidiuretic hormone, and that's going to be done up here. Where'd my cursor go? Here we go, up here. Then oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone are going to be transported down the axons of the hypothalamic hypophyseal tract to the posterior pituitary. They're then going to be stored in axon terminals in the posterior pituitary. And when the associated hypothalamic neurons fire, action potentials arriving at the axon terminals will cause either oxytocin or antidiuretic hormone to be released into the blood. It's just going to be dependent upon what the circumstance calls for. The hypothalamus itself secretes releasing and inhibiting hormones to the anterior pituitary to regulate hormone secretion. It's just showing kind of a similar situation here. Well, no, actually it's not similar at all. Scratch that. When appropriately stimulated, the hypothalamus neurons are going to secrete either releasing or inhibiting hormones into the primary capillary plexus. Okay, so we have these hypothalamic neurons. Here, they're synthesizing either releasing or inhibiting hormones, or releasing and inhibiting hormones, as the case may be. And it's going to get released into the primary capillary plexus here. And then the hypothalamic hormones are going to travel through the portal veins to the anterior pituitary, where they're either going to stimulate or inhibit the release of a hormone that is actually made in the anterior pituitary. In response to those hormones, the anterior pituitary will either be inhibited or it'll secrete hormones into the secondary capillary plexus, which will empty into general circulation. So it'll empty into here, which will empty out there back into circulation. So the 2 hormones that are released by the posterior pituitary are oxytocin and antidiuretic hormone. They're each composed of 9 amino acids. They're almost identical, but they differ in 2 amino acids. Oxytocin does a number of things, and you may actually remember oxytocin from Anatomy and Physiology 1 because it's often talked about in relation to a positive feedback mechanism because of the fact that childbirth is a positive feedback mechanism. And oxytocin is a strong stimulant of uterine contractions and it's released during childbirth. Oxytocin also acts as a hormonal trigger for milk ejection. Again, both are positive feedback mechanisms, and it acts also as a neurotransmitter in the brain. Oxytocin is also known as like the cuddle hormone. So, for example, whenever you pet your dog, both you and your dog will secrete oxytocin. Whenever you're with your significant other and you guys are, I guess, like hugging and stuff, then you're both secreting oxytocin. Then we have antidiuretic hormone, ADH. The hypothalamus contains osmoreceptors that are going to monitor solute concentrations. So what this means is in our body, we have these receptors that are just trying to detect what the osmolarity is or what the concentration is of our body fluids. Okay, if the concentration gets too high, the posterior pituitary is going to be triggered to secrete antidiuretic hormone. Okay, and I don't know if you kind of broke down that whole antidiuretic, but a diuretic is something that you would take if you want to get rid of fluid, right? Anti means not. So that means you're not getting rid of fluid. So antidiuretic hormone is actually going to make you retain water. And that's exactly what's happening. So it's going to target the kidney tubules to reabsorb more water to inhibit or prevent urine formation. It is also released, or it's triggered to be released by pain, low blood pressure, and then some drugs. It is inhibited by alcohol and diuretics, and high concentrations of ADH causes vasoconstriction, so it's also called vasopressin. And this is a table, and it's just showing the posterior pituitary, and it releases oxytocin. It tells you what it's stimulated by, inhibited by, and then antidiuretic hormone, again, stimulated, inhibited, and then it actually shows you the target organ and the effects. And don't worry about this part too much for class. As far as the exam, you don't have to worry too much about the effects of hyposecretion and hypersecretion. However, this may show up as an example on, or a question on a wiki, or it could show up as a question for extra credit in the middle of these PowerPoints, but it will not show up on the exam, that last column. All right, anterior pituitaries. All 6 hormones are peptide hormones. All but 2 are tropic, which means that they are going to regulate the secretion of other hormones. The easiest way to remember the anterior pituitary hormones is flat pig. F-L-A-T, flat, P-G, no I. That's 6 things, and that's 6 hormones, or 6 letters, 6 hormones. And it actually separates it out nicely. So let's go over what they are in order. So the F in flat would be follicle stimulating hormone, or FSH. That is a tropic hormone. The L is luteinizing hormone, or LH, also tropic. The A, adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, also tropic. The T, thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH, also tropic. So it's actually really cool because it not only helps you memorize the actual hormones, but the whole word flat are all the tropic hormones, and then the P and the G for the pig are the non-tropic hormones. So the P stands for prolactin, and the G stands for growth hormone. So growth hormone is also called somatotropin, and it's produced by somatotropic cells, and it has both direct actions on metabolism as well as indirect growth promoting actions. So the direct actions on metabolism are its glucose sparing actions that decrease the rate of cellular glucose uptake and metabolism. These are known as anti-insulin effects. It's actually going to trigger the liver to break down glycogen into glucose. It will increase blood levels of fatty acids for use as fuel and encourages cellular protein synthesis. Now, the indirect actions on growth are that growth hormone triggers liver, skeletal muscle, and bone to produce something called IGF. And IGF is known as insulin-like growth factor. IGF then is going to stimulate cellular uptake of nutrients that's used to synthesize DNA and proteins that are needed for cell division, formation of collagen, deposition of bone matrix. And then growth hormone will also stimulate most cells to enlarge and divide, but major targets are bone and skeletal muscle. The regulation of secretion of growth hormone. So growth hormone release or inhibition is chiefly regulated by hypothalamic hormones on the somatotropic cells. So growth hormone releasing hormone stimulates growth hormone release. That makes sense, right? And it's triggered by low blood growth hormone or glucose levels or high amino acid levels. Growth hormone inhibiting hormone inhibits the release of growth hormone and is triggered by either an increase in growth hormone in the blood or IGF levels. And then we have ghrelin, which is known as the hunger hormone. It also stimulates growth hormone release. So that's what this is going through here. We have the hypothalamus is going to secrete one of the two different hormones, either the releasing hormone or the inhibiting hormone. And that is going to affect the anterior pituitary. The anterior pituitary is what secretes growth hormone. And then we have the direct actions on the direct metabolic actions, which are to increase blood glucose and other anti-insulin effects. But then we have the indirect actions on the growth promoting aspect, and that's where it stimulates the liver and other tissues to produce IGF, which will then do things like increase skeletal growth, increase cartilage growth. And then I'm losing my cursor. So higher levels of growth hormone as well as levels of IGF will actually inhibit further synthesis of growth hormone. Then we have thyroid stimulating hormone. This is a tropic hormone. It's part of the word flat, right? It's also known as thyrotropin, and that's because it's produced by thyrotropic cells. It stimulates normal development and secretory activity of the thyroid. That makes sense. It's called thyroid stimulating hormone, so it probably stimulates the thyroid, and that's exactly what it does. It will stimulate the thyroid to secrete thyroid hormone. Okay, the release is triggered by thyrotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. So again, it's being controlled by the hypothalamus. Hypothalamus releases a hormone, which causes the anterior pituitary to release a hormone, which is going to cause the thyroid gland to release thyroid hormone. It's going to be inhibited by rising levels of thyroid hormone that act on both pituitary and hypothalamus. It's also inhibited by GHIH. Growth hormone inhibiting hormone. And this is just kind of this little flow chart-ish thing kind of showing we got the hypothalamus, and this is the releasing hormone, which is going to cause the anterior pituitary to release thyroid stimulating hormone, which is going to cause the thyroid gland to release thyroid hormones. And we have controls at kind of every point here. So high levels of thyroid hormone are going to actually inhibit further release of TRH and TSH. Then we have adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH. It's also known as corticotropin, and it's secreted by the corticotropic cells. ACTH stimulates the adrenal cortex to release corticosteroids. The regulation of ACTH release, it's triggered by hypothalamic corticotropin releasing hormone in a daily rhythm. It's usually highest in the morning. We have internal and external factors that also alter the release of corticotropin-releasing hormone, including fever, hypoglycemia, stressors. Then we have the gonadotropins. And the gonadotropins are going to be our follicle-stimulating hormone, or FSH, and our luteinizing hormone, or LH. And follicle-stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone are secreted by gonadotropic cells of the anterior pituitary. Follicle-stimulating hormone is going to stimulate the production of gametes, so in males, sperm, and females, eggs. And luteinizing hormone is going to promote the production of gonadal hormones. In females, luteinizing hormone is going to help mature the follicle of the egg and trigger ovulation and release of estrogen and progesterone. In males, luteinizing hormone is going to stimulate the production of testosterone. In children, boys and girls that have not reached puberty, you're not going to find LH or FSH in the blood. The regulation of gonadotropin release is triggered by gonadotropin releasing hormone during and after puberty. And it's going to be suppressed by gonadal hormones. So this is just going to be a feedback situation. Then we have prolactin. So now we're in the part of the pig part. So prolactin is secreted by prolactin cells of the anterior pituitary. And what it does is it stimulates milk production. So do not confuse oxytocin and prolactin. They're both needed, right? Prolactin is for the actual milk production and oxytocin is for the release. The role of prolactin in males is not well understood. Regulation primarily controlled by prolactin inhibiting hormone, which is also called dopamine. And prolactin inhibiting hormone prevents the release of prolactin until it's needed, with decreased levels leading up to lactation. Increased estrogen levels will stimulate prolactin, and this is the reason behind breast swelling and tenderness during the menstrual cycle. The levels of prolactin in the blood will also rise towards the end of pregnancy, and then suckling will actually stimulate prolactin release and promote continued milk production. So this table, and I showed you earlier for the posterior pituitary, this table really breaks down all the different hormones and what their effects are. So you are welcome to look at this. I'm not going to go over this again because I just went over this, but you can see that we have starting off with growth hormone, and then you can see here we have the target organs are the liver, the muscle, the bone, cartilage, other tissues. And then it also goes into some of the effects of hypo and hypersecretion, which again is not going to be on the exam, however, could show up as a group wiki question, or it could show up as an extra credit question. And then it continues on: thyroid stimulating hormone, adrenocorticotropic hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, and prolactin. And this says questions. Clearly there's just one question. So sorry about that, but I'll leave that up here for just a minute so you can write it down and then you can turn it in. I will have a place in Blackboard very, very soon for you guys to turn your extra credit in, but do not turn it in until you have all of the chapters extra credit completed, because you're only going to be able to turn it in one time. So this is all I have for you. I hope you guys have a wonderful day.